I'm Familian Apples, and I'm back at Penn State, York to see Dr. Majeske give a class in HDFS. Dr. Majeske is going to teach us the history of some of the most popular religions so that we can understand our friends when they're talking about their beliefs.
So, today we are going to try to cover essentially all of world religion in about an hour. So, first off, can anybody name for me some polytheistic religions? Yeah. Next. Wrong answers are also good. Is it Buddhism? Not quite. We can put Buddhism, yeah. Yeah, Native American traditions.
I don't know what it would be called, but like Greek.
Yeah, Greek. Now, one other thing that's really important here. So Greek, what goes with Greek? What do we often think when we think of Greek? Roman. There's some popular movies out. What are some other ones? Got a big hammer. Pounds it. Yeah, the Nordic gods, yeah. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about here, and I want to point it out real quick here at the beginning, is that when we're talking about these polytheistic traditions, it's very important to me that we do not call them mythologies. The people who lived them, it was their religion. The concept of being mythology was done by Christians in order to belittle what they believed in. So I will always consider all religions. I do not distinguish between them, and so polytheistic traditions are just as valid of a religion as any other. Now, the other big category we're going to cover is Abrahamic traditions. There are three major Abrahamic traditions. Do you know what those are?
Judaism.
Yep, Judaism.
Christianity.
Christianity. I got another hand. Is another hand the other one? Or are you going to take Christianity?
Is it like Jewish and Islam?
Yeah, we got you in Islam. Correct, Islam. So below this line up here, I'm going to be drawing and writing about the Abrahamic traditions. And above the line, we're going to be covering more of the polytheistic traditions as we go through so that I can cover both of them. Because again, they're both equally important in understanding how things happen. Now, what makes something a religion? How do we know that it counts as a religion? There's something that they all have in common. It may range from being on the back of a sea turtle, to a female deity that gave birth, to a god that created it, to even those using science and religion combined, and that God may have used the Big Bang. It doesn't matter how they came about it. All religions have a belief about how the earth was created. Now, when we go back to 5,000 years BCE, that's a long time ago. So give or take, that's about when all religious traditions place the creation. It's in that range. Now, 5,000 BCE, how many here are familiar with what BCE stands for?
Before Common Era.
Yes, before the Common Era, before the Christian era. The reason is because 0, and so you may have also learned AD instead, BC and AD, that is not the international norm, it's BCE and CE, so the Christian era and before the Christian or Common Era. But yes, we use the Common Era instead because that is non-religiously defined, whereas BC and AD is recognizing Christ. And so when we use world religions, we do BCE. And that's why you will see those up there. And you may see them in other places in timelines, so you know what that means. But most importantly, if you think that we are about 2,000 years since 0, we're now going to go back 5,000 years the other direction. So if you think about how much time from 0 to now, we're going to go back to 5,000. Now, the interesting thing is we are about 2,000, and my first time point is actually 2,000. The reason is not just because it's convenient, but because that's when we first have written records. We don't have any written records around from 5,000. We have about 3,000 years of only reflection. So does anybody know who was our first group that we still have written records from? The Veda, which becomes Hindu. They They don't call themselves Hindu, but they're the ones that we have the still today existing written records from that long ago. Other people write about that long ago. So that comes down to about 2000. Now, do you know what's happening at about 2000 in the Abrahamic tradition? The flood, Noah's Ark. So that is around 2000. It's about, now ours is retrospective. If you're talking about what is taught in that way in Noah's Ark. But it takes place at about that same time. Now, one of the things that's important, I think, about Noah's Ark is the fact that in all of these written traditions, the word earth is not used for the flood. The word land is the word used in all the lands. So there are some religious traditions that believe the whole four corners of the lands is the whole earth was flooded. Some religious traditions believe that it was the region that was flooded, which we actually have more geological evidence that the whole region did flood. More than that, perhaps the whole earth flooded. But that's one's own religious beliefs, how that falls in. But to know that while they all have the same story, they sometimes play out differently because the original languages was land. They didn't have the word earth. All right, moving on, we're going to take down here, and we're going to go to Abraham. Who is our polytheistic God at the moment that has to do with Abraham? Of course, there's lots running around. Anybody know? Baal or Baal, or depending on where you're from in the United States and how we pronounce that. Abraham's father practiced a polytheistic tradition of Baal, under Baal, the god Baal, where they required human sacrifice. Abraham was supposed to be sacrificed to Baal, but he didn't. Obviously, several sons. So we get through that. Does anybody know who Abraham's son? This is going to matter as we go forward. So that's Baal, who's polytheistic. Abraham's supposed to be sacrificed. He has a son named Isaac. So in the Old Testament and in Quran and Torah and their own versions, Abraham is also asked by God to sacrifice his son. Now, in that version, he takes his son to sacrifice him. A lamb is provided, and he doesn't have to sacrifice his son. But it's interesting because we see that him having to do to his son what almost happened to him. So we see some of these family transmissions of things. That's why in the family studies, I think it's important to bring it up and understand how they're always connected. There's a line here, but they're in the same regions. These things are going on. Who is Isaac's son? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. That's the whole Joseph and the coat of many colors is his son. So he has a son named Joseph. And what happens to Joseph? He is not well liked by his brothers. So they're like, you know what? We don't like him very much. So what we're going to do is sell him into Egypt. That is right around, we're in here in about the 1500 BCE range that he sold into Egypt. Then what happens? Big famines. And the rest of his family ends up joining him. Israel and their descendants are currently living up in Egypt. And Egypt, that's also polytheistic with the pharaohs, right? When people move in, when foreigners move in, what jobs do they get to have? Okay, bottom of the totem pole, right? So they get to come up here, but they do become the slaves, essentially. The servants and the slaves of the era. They're the ones coming in, so they're serving up here. So our next timeline is about, I'm gonna go right here. And who's next in my story? Any guesses? Moses, correct. So Moses is born into the Hebrew tradition. However, there's this rumor that this Hebrew is going to take everything over. So the Pharaoh decides to kill all the firstborns. If you've seen Prince of Egypt, that's close to the correct story. It is animation, so there's some liberties taken there. But the Prince of Egypt can catch you up a little bit on that story. Moses, he was raised by a princess, not the queen. But in other words, he was raised in that tradition, in the home of Pharaoh. At one point, he has an awakening. These awakenings are common among the stories we're going to cover. Moses has an awakening and realizes that he needs to actually take all of the Hebrews. Now, people often think Pharaoh was a bit ridiculous and should have just let the Hebrews go if they wanted to go. But I want you to go back in American history. This is as close as we have. I want you to be around in the early 1800s, late 1700s, where the plantations in the southern United States are thriving and slaves are owned in Virginia and all the way up north and are actively producing what we have to give as a country in the United States. What if one of the slaves said, we're all leaving, all of us? Every single one of them in the entire United States was just going to hop on a boat and go. What would that have done to the early United States economy? We were dependent on the labor, the cotton fields, the tobacco fields. Everything we were selling and doing as this brand new country was dependent on the slaves. So were they. So Pharaoh's, you can't go, is like you can't ruin our economy. You can't just all leave. Now, Pharaoh might have been open to Moses and like 10 others going, right? Like he might have been able to take his family and go, but not all of them. So when you listen to that story, it's important to recognize what's going on behind there. So we then have the plagues. We then have Pharaoh finally allowing a little bit them to leave. That's when you see the parting of the Red Sea in their story, and they're able to walk through and finally leave this huge group of people. Same time, we're going to go to China. Do I know what's going on in China at about this time? Pretty sure Chinese history may not be your expertise, right? So this is the beginning of the Chinese New Year. When they date back their history to when the Chinese New Year began, it is about within 100 years or so of Moses. Now, I'm going to tell you something about the Chinese New Year, and especially those of you who've been answering my questions. I want you to pay attention. In China, around the Chinese New Year, all of them take red to go around their doors. The tradition goes that the red protects them from the destroying angel that will come and kill the firstborn of their families. While they have no belief in the need to eat unleavened bread, all of the traditional foods eaten during the Chinese New Year are unleavened. What does that sound like?
Isn't like in the story of Moses, like they put like the red around the doors to keep the pharaohs from coming and killing their babies?
Yes, exactly. It's almost the same story. For as many hundreds of years later as we now have it, and the time period it aligns, it could, for all intents and purposes, be the same story. There are so many overlaps between the tradition between the Chinese New Year. And if you look up the Passover, the story of the Passover, because the Passover tells this story of Moses. If you've never done the Passover, that's all that it is recounting the story of Moses. It's the same thing, give or take. Now, I am not a religious scholar in Chinese and Judean Passover traditions to know exactly all the lineups, but I can tell you that there are lots of lineups. And I think it's really cool to look at that. We don't know if it's because missionaries went over to China and taught them from Moses's group, if it's because the Chinese descendants from Egypt, which there are genetic ties, that they heard of the stories of them leaving and saw the people put up the things. We don't know how or why this happened, but there's definitely a connection between the Passover and the Chinese New Year. If you're interested, you can Google and learn more about it. All right, the next one we're going to do is we're going to kind of jump over here and we're going to talk about Babylon. Babylon was a great empire of its time, and there were rumors down here. So they were polytheistic, the Babylonians. And down here, does anybody know who we have down here before they took over? There's two prophets I want to talk about. One of them, Jeremiah. People heard of Jeremiah? He's the prophet that said the Babylonians are going to come and take over. And there was another one, his contemporary. Name is Lehi. Same thing, they're buddies, both claiming Babylon's going to take over. There's a difference. Jeremiah sticks around and fights for the people. Lehi, on the other hand, so we're here at about 600 BCE, says, we're going to leave. I'm going to take my family, group of people, and Lehi kind of takes off, travels in the wilderness outside of Jerusalem for a number of years, ends up at a body of water. His group builds a boat, gets in the boat, sails. Eventually they land in probably the Central Americas, South America, somewhere. We don't know where exactly they land, but they kind of take off. So we're going to leave them hanging for a minute. So that's what happens down there. Now, while that's going on, we come in here to our next big point. What goes on here at 0? What is 0? Birth of, what was his actual name? What's his Hebrew name? Everyone know his Hebrew name? Jeshua, yeah, which is in English, Joshua. Jesus is the Latin, that's what the Romans called him. He called himself Jeshua. And the Romans called him Jesus. Christ, Messiah, all of those are titles that go along with his name. So here we have Jesus is the way that most of us call him in the United States. Now, he is still actively part of Judaism, Christianity, Islam. As you see, we have not split anything off yet. It's important to recognize that Jesus, or Jeshua, is an important character and figure in all of the Abrahamic traditions. There are differences, whether or not he's the greatest prophet, whether or not he's a god. There are debates about his character, but he is, and his teachings are active in all of the Abrahamic traditions. But first, I want to talk about the Jewish-Christian split. So Jeshua was what? What religion did he belong to? Judaism. Yeah, he belonged to Judaism. He didn't actually come to start a new religion. He came to correct the things that were going on wrong. If you actually read the New Testament or the other versions from other traditions, you will see that he came to make corrections. But what happened at the end is some people followed and some did not. And over time, the word Christian was given to those who followed Christ as a derogatory term. Nobody wanted to be known as a Christian back then because it was really, really bad. It wasn't a positive term. Now, just like other terms, sometimes derogatory terms become positive. And today it's a positive term. But back then it wasn't. And that matters because we're going to talk about other religions and other terms that changed over time. So if we come over here, there we go. I wanted to show you, so where we have the Jewish-Christian split, we're going to get to more Christianity in a little bit, but I just want to point out that there are a lot of divisions, that sometimes we often recognize the variety in religion within Christianity in the United States, but we don't always think about it the other. We're not going to go through them all, but just to know that there's variety in Jewish tradition. And so I want to point that out here now that we're talking about dividing them out. The next one that we're going to talk about is 400. Everybody know what happened in 400 CE in Christian tradition, Catholic Christian? It's the Council of Nicaea. Anybody heard of the Council of Nicaea? Council of Nicaea. Now, what had happened? There's some very important things that's going on here. The Council of Nicaea. So if you're familiar with the second half of the New Testament, that's when you get all these letters. Because there's no internet, no cell phones, no texting. We're writing letters. We don't even have both sides of all the letters. So we don't even always know everything that's going on today from back then. But if we'd had X, or formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, or whatever going on, they would have been tweeting and texting about this really hot trending topic. The hot trending topic in 400 CE is this concept of a trinity. Are they really all one instead of three? Previous to Nicaea, here back here, we have God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Ghost is 3 separate beings. You can see this because it takes a long time before this Council of Nicaea and the decision to go to the Trinity is concluded. If you look up like the crowning of Mary, you will almost always see in these early medieval time periods, both an adult Jesus and an adult Father crowning her together, because it's from the time period before the Trinity became a thing. Now, it doesn't mean it was wrong or right or anything. It just hadn't been decided on that way. There was lots of biblical evidence for both directions. So they had a council, and the council decided that they would follow that. So that is when, 400 years after, also at about 600 years after, at another council, which is less important, the name of it, but that is when they start celebrating the birth of Christ. Before then, they did not celebrate Christmas. Christmas doesn't start till about, just the concept of celebrating a Christmas comes from others celebrating the sun god of Egypt. And so then they want to celebrate others. And so then it comes through to celebrating Christmas, which was originally celebrated in April, which according to the New Testament would have been when Christ was born. That's when the shepherds, the flocks would have been in the fields. But it was moved to December in order to reflect the traditions of the region with the winter solstice. So we have those traditions that's going on there. Now, if we come up top here, we have Zen Buddhism, which is the most common Buddhism in the United States. However, if you take a look up here, you can see that Buddhism also follows a whole lot of variety. And for example, this one, Huineng, which is the one that comes down eventually into Zen, was a Buddha that was young, looking for enlightenment, was an uneducated farmer, and found a path towards God in some senses, but which led him to being a Buddha in the Buddhist tradition. So that is what's happening up here. So we're seeing it's a very religious time period in the world. That's one of the things I think is important to recognize, that we have Buddhism, there's a lot going on there, which comes out of Hinduism. Some stay obviously Hindu, but Buddhism comes out of that tradition, and then the Zen Buddhism comes out of that. And that's where we have the 6th patriarch. He's a really big one. That comes down also right in here. So we're doing some big things going on. Also, same time, 400 years. Now, this is Lehi, the one we sent off to what is in some part of the ancient American continents. Do you know what story this is? Anybody know what book this is? The Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon. So the final prophet alive at 400 CE, his name was Moroni. He was the last of maybe 24, small group of individuals, whole nation being destroyed, like the end of a big movie where everybody dies. He's here. His dad had worked really, really hard abridging all of these records that they collected over this time and written over this time. He abridges them, makes them shorter, gives it off to his son Moroni. His name, the father's name, is Mormon. So Moroni names the book after his dad. So the Book of Mormon is named in honor of a father and the way that he passed down, and he watched his father die, and then he went and took and buried the place. So that is, if you've ever wondered what's in the Book of Mormon, it's just a record of this time period in the American continent. Now, yes, Christ comes here in the middle, and that is also included in the Book of Mormon, in which Jeshua, or Jesus, after he dies and is resurrected, he says in the New Testament, "The other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, and them too must hear my voice." So they believe that Jesus, after he went and ascended into heaven, he visited around the world, including the American continent. So there's a record of his visit to the Americas in the Book of Mormon. So that's what that is, in case you've ever wondered. And that's all that it is. It's quite short in relation to what the other books are going to be covering. Well, the New Testament is pretty much right here. That's even a smaller period of time. So now we have that, and we're going to come back. The reason I bring this up because it matters a lot in our later American religious history, how this fits in right here. So our next one, right after, at 600, same time we're about ready, we have another person named Muhammad. Yeah, he is a prophet in Islam. You are correct. Historian. So he's out traveling in near what would now be closer to the Mediterranean, Italy type region, Greece, Italy, the Mediterranean region. He's out traveling in that region, meets a monk. He's from a polytheistic tradition, meets a monk. The monk tells him about, at that point it would be Catholicism. That's all that we have at that point, just one branch of Christianity. And he's very impressed. He goes back to his country in the Middle Eastern region. We still don't have internet, texting, or Facebook to keep up. So he prays and he says, I met this monk. I learned about this religion. I want to know how to practice it. He's visited by an angel. The angel's name is Gabriel. Who else did Gabriel visit? Correct. I saw whispering back there. Mary. Gabriel's the angel that visits Mary and says, you will conceive and bear a son. Muhammad is visited by the exact same angel and told how to practice the life and the ways that Jesus taught. Now, Muhammad does not write down what happened in his visit from the angel. Generations later, it gets written down by his descendants. So we don't actually know, just like a lot of these other ones, what the original account was. But we do know that in Islam, we have a lot of variety too, coming back from the different denominations that started with Islam. And it's important to note that Muhammad, like the others, was seeking enlightenment. Had a visit from an angel, just as many others had, as we see across the board in these stories, and tried to align his life with the way he felt that he should lead it. Many of the traditions from today, some of the fundamentals and other traditions are not mainstream. Mainstream Islam is very similar to a lot of the other mainstream Abrahamic traditions. So that's Muhammad when he comes in here. And that's when we officially have Islam eventually splitting off. Now, we have the era of the Vikings. So this is where Thor and all of the, you have Thor's Day coming up here in a few days. You also have Freya, which is the head goddess. Do you know what day is hers? Friday. That's why it's such a fun day, because it's the goddess's day. She's all about having fun. So we have Thor's Day, Friday. We also have Saturday. We take from these different polytheistic traditions, are embedded into our culture. That's the Viking tradition. One of the things that's cool about them is because we're coming up here in Europe now, back here with the Council of NAA, the Vikings live in Denmark, Norway, Sweden region, Iceland, very far north. They have not yet been converted to Catholicism like all the others. Lots of Europe has been converted. With conversion comes countries. Pre-Catholicism in Europe, we didn't have countries. The Catholic Christian movement created countries. The bishops came in and said, hey, you're king, guess what? God actually made you king, but I'm going to be a lot in charge too. So the bishops have as much power as the kings, but in different ways. And they start organizing lands into countries, like dioceses, but into countries and regions. So many of you, if you had ancestors coming over a long time ago in the, even up through some of these periods, they would have been living just in regions or kingdoms, but not in countries organized the way we have it today. That comes through Christianity. So the nice thing about the Vikings is that they're one of the last to convert. So we learn a lot from them. They actually go out, they discover lots of lands, such as Iceland, Greenland, England. The word Eng means meadows. Newfoundland, which means Newfoundland. So they do a lot of great things coming out there. and we learn about what it's like for these conversions to happen. What happens in the Viking region is they are not destroyed. We do not, the Norwegians and the Danes and the Swedes and the Icelandic, those who are still there and descendants, they are still the Vikings' descendants. They didn't get wiped out. They didn't get pushed away. They just got converted. And in the conversion to Catholicism came the Latin alphabet. The language is the same. The reason why they have a hard time reading the ancient runes is because they're written in a different alphabet. But they're really linguistically the same language we have today. So we can learn a lot from the Vikings as they held out. They become Catholic about here, and that is the full Viking period. When you study the Vikings, it's about 800 to 1100 in that range. Is when that's going on. At this same time period, right in here, right as we're going off, we have what's called the Great Schism. What's the Great Schism? We're going to divide into two groups in Europe. On the one side, we're going to have the Catholics. And on the other side, we're going to have, we got one, Orthodox. Orthodox, so this is the East-West divide in Europe. So we have the Catholics, which is all of essentially Western Europe, and Orthodox, which is mostly Central Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, Hungary, that region. So the big schism at this point is about who's in charge. Who do Catholics say is in charge? Who's the head of the Catholic Church? The Pope. Why is the Bishop of Rome the head of the Catholic Church? Back at Christ's time, Christ dies. Who's the head of the church when he dies? Peter. Peter becomes the head of the church at that point. Peter goes out, he becomes the Bishop of Rome. And so in the Catholic tradition, that position of Bishop of Rome, which Peter had, then is the inherited route to being the head of the church, following after Peter. The Orthodox don't think Rome should be in charge. They think they should get to have their own patriarchs in their own regions, and it should be more like group-led, or that they should be able to designate their own. So then we split off into the Orthodox. So you have Greek Orthodox, you have Eastern Orthodox, but you have Orthodox is often what they're called. They are still Christians from this side of the Christian faith, along with the Catholics. All right, so we've got that split going off there. Our next one comes in. We're going to walk down here to 1300. We're going to talk about the Jews again. And we're going to come back, so I need a little bit of space here. The Jews are blamed for something here. Anybody know what happens in about that time frame? The Jews are blamed for? The plague. The Jews are in a process of migrating up to Europe at this point, at about the time of the plague. Why are they migrating up to Europe? Why are they leaving the Middle Eastern regions and migrating up to Europe, or immigrating up to Europe? What happens in here? Down in Jerusalem. Anybody seen like, oh yeah, go ahead.
Is it because of the war?
Yeah, which war? We have lots of movies about this where people from England and Europe go down to the Middle East and fight. Anybody heard of the Holy War? Where all the knights go down to save Jerusalem? Because one of the things that's shared about the Abrahamic traditions is they all have a claim on Jerusalem and all equally valid. And the best way to decide who's right is clearly to have a war. That's obviously, and they're still doing it today. So clearly that's just the way we're going to make this decision. So they're in the Holy War. So a lot of Europeans are heading down to the region. So the Jews are like, we're not, because it's really an Islamic Christian war going on right here. So a lot of them kind of take off. You would do, right? Like, I don't need to live here anymore. The plague happens, the Jews are blamed. So it's well before World War II, but this is where we start some of this idea in Europe that the Jews are bringing in negative things. Next, we're going to come over and we're going to do around 1500. I'll bring us over here. Let's see, we'll bring the Viking tradition over too, because they're going to matter. They're not still Vikings, but it's the same group. So we're still going to care about them for a while. And right about here. So this is where we have another story. We're going to follow this out of the Zen tradition, which is why I have that up there. We have one who meets a Muslim. Well, they probably met lots of Muslims, but in their conversation with the Muslims, they learned about this idea of a single God rather than polytheism. So a group from India, Hindi, decides that they're going to incorporate the concept of a single God into their faith. That is called, so it's not the Islamic tradition. Islam means Hindu is, you guys mentioned it earlier, Sikh. So Sikhism is very similar to Hinduism, but they have a belief in a single God. So they kind of blend some of those traditions together. And that's coming in here around 1500. We also have some other important people around that time. One is Martin Luther. Yeah, what religion was he? He was Catholic. He was Catholic and he nailed some, he kind of looked through and was like, I think we're getting a little off course. So he was trying to get the Catholic Church back on course. What about Tyndale? Who's Tyndale? He had so much gall, he translated the Bible into English. Treason, heresy, death. Martin Luther also translated into German, but he didn't die. He was not killed for it there. Tyndale translates it English. Before this time period, all of these things going on, the people do not all speak Latin, but everything religious is going on in Latin. Thus, it makes it a lot easier for the bishops to describe what they need to be doing because none of the people can read the scriptures themselves. So now we're getting that. The next person I want to talk about is King Henry. What do you know about King Henry? Yeah, go ahead, say it louder. He had lots of wives. How does that run with Catholicism? Not well. So what do you have to do? Yeah, we gotta not be Catholic. Because we can't be Catholic and have divorce, so we clearly need to split. So he's got some things going on here. Then we have Calvin. What do you know who Calvin is? He's in the Swiss region, also questioning Catholic tradition, along with Anabaptists. Does anybody know the three Anabaptist traditions from Switzerland, Germany, mountainous areas? One is Amish. Second is, when you think of Amish, you also think of Mennonite. Third, Amish, Mennonite, and also very popular in Pennsylvania, Brethren. So they are all living in kind of the Swiss Germany region. Again, it's not Switzerland or Germany at exactly this point. It doesn't quite have its name, but it's that region in the Alps. And there's something they all have in common that they disagree with the Catholics about. All of these have something they're disagreeing with the Catholics about. This one happens to do with age of baptism. They thought that people should be able to choose to be baptized, so they should be an adult. There's one problem. If you're Catholic in a Catholic region, where baptism, why do we baptize infants in Catholicism?
Because if you're not baptized, you go to hell.
Yeah, if you're not baptized, you go to hell. So what kind of a parent sends their kid to hell? Therefore, it was punishable by death if you didn't baptize your children. So what do you think they did? Hint, they're from Pennsylvania region now. So what did they do? They moved. and just like lots of other traditions, when you're having issues, they left. So these ones left and came to the Lancaster region, right? Like it's an important part of our religious history here in Pennsylvania. But all of these together represent a time period. Remember what that time period's called? The Reformation. So if you learn about the Reformation, that's what we're talking about here. This is when we're like, wait a minute. And then by the time we get to the 1600s, we have a war in Europe. And what is this war between? Now we got it. Now we got the Catholics and the Protestants. Yep, now we got the Catholics and the Protestants. Now, that war has ended in most regions of Europe. Where is it still active?
Ireland?
Ireland, still active in Ireland. They're still working on this one. It's been a while, but that's how long Ireland's been working on this. Has been sent around, depending on what region and part of Europe you're talking about. Now, just like in our Civil War in the United States, we have the Mason-Dixon line, you know, exit 3 coming up, not too far from here. From Baltimore, if you didn't know that, south, north. They kind of have a line too. It's not a perfect line, but in general, the Catholics live in what region of Europe? The north or the south? The south. Italy, France, Spain. That's where the Catholics, that's how you get South America being Catholic. England, Scandinavia, Northern Germany. That's where you get the Protestants coming from. And then along the eastern side, you still have Orthodox. Now, the thing is the Orthodox had been living there in their own way for a while. So during this first migration period, as you notice here, what's going on in the Americas right here? 1600s. What's big in the 1600s in the United States, which isn't yet the United States? We celebrate it fourth Thursday in November. Thanksgiving. So what's going on? We have Native Americans and who's coming? Well, Christopher Columbus is 1452. Columbus sails the ocean blue. So yeah, that's what this one, we find it. But here's when we start getting a lot of pilgrims and people coming. It's quite a while after Columbus. Actually, he doesn't come to the United States. He goes down to the Caribbean area. But then we start really having people coming. Why did people come to the United States? Religious freedom. What were they freeing from? Like death in some regions, right? Like they were coming for some serious religious freedom. Many of these people are coming in during this Catholic Protestant war. There's a great migration to what will become the United States and Canada. That was looking very good to them right now. We also see that while it looks like a long time, the Vikings were one of the last to become Catholics here. They are actually one of the first to convert to Lutheranism, to Protestantism. And so Scandinavia has the shortest time period of Catholicism in the European history, which again, it gives us some really cool things to study. And also in ways that it relates to what's going on in the United States. So in our Protestant Catholic wars, so we're now going to, we have the Reformation up there at the top. I'm going to talk through some of these things, but that you start seeing a great variety in Christian faith, just like we saw with Buddhism and Islam and Judaism. Christianity has a lot of variety too. So, but what are we going to have going on in here first? First, we have the First Great Awakening in Europe. First Great Awakening happens in Europe. So it kind of, we have this war, we have the beginning of the Reformation, we have big war, which is kind of going on, but it slows down. Great Awakening. When we call it a Great Awakening in a religious term, do you know what that means? Religion is cool. Why go to a rock concert when you can go to religious revival? Like, I'm serious. That's what it means. Everybody is all about spirituality and religiosity in a Great Awakening. Europe has this Great Awakening where we're all rolling and rumbling about religion. We get things like Methodist. You know, we get different faiths coming out. You can see it right up here on the board. Oh, sorry. The first Great Awakening happens right here. So Calvinism came off. All these things are starting to come through. So we have that's in Europe. Then the next thing we have that I like to point out is here, because this is still the United States, and this is a U.S. cultures course, okay? Hawaii gets introduced to Christianity. So as the United States, Hawaii takes a while before we start seeing Christianity there. They're still polytheistic all the way across, okay? They don't have a lot of this, but I want to bring it up here that Hawaii is getting introduced to Christianity there. Then we have the Second Great Awakening. And that happens in the United States. So Europe's now living their way. They've got their divisions through the Protestants. You know, they've got a lot of Lutherans hanging out there. And most of Scandinavia and Germany. You got the Church of England, which are the Anglicans. And then you have Catholics. They don't have quite the variety that we have running around from the Second Great Awakening, which you can see up there on the board as well. Kind of that big one in there. And we see some things that come out of that time period. During the Second Great Awakening, we have some new topics that are trending. You like trending topics? This is a thing for eternity. It's just what the topics are changed. One of them is Zionism. Zionism is this idea that maybe the United States is the promised land and God brought us here, and that is why we are here. We are the promised chosen people on the promised chosen land, not Europe, the United States. It is Zion. Going along with that is millennialism. Millennialism goes in with Zionism, but it's the idea that we're in a time period where Christ is going to come again. We're going to have the second coming of Jesus Christ. We're going to need to prepare for that. We're in a preparation. Again, this is not happening in Europe. This is happening in the United States. We're all worried about preparing for the second coming of Jesus Christ. And in that, we have, what do we need to do to prepare? What are the sins and the problems of the day? Alcohol becomes this like really hot debate. Is alcohol of the devil? It was never of the devil in Europe. It's a thing in the United States, this idea about the prohibition and other ideas are coming in. Should we, shouldn't we? Whether or not you agree or not, hot topic. Another hot topic is, we're going to talk about women. Women's rights, what should they do? Where do they fit into the kingdom of God? Catholicism had quite a bit of women. Protestantism washed away the need of women. So then in the Second Great Awakening, it's now coming back. You can tell this because if you go to European cathedrals and places, you will see women and figures of women, not just Mary, but all sorts of female figures all over the place. You go to the oldest churches in the United States built around these regions, there are no depictions of women in any way. So Protestantism, while it did some things, we lost the influence of women. So that becomes a big debate during the Second Great Awakening in the United States. The next one is Sabbath. Sunday. In the United States, originally, everybody worked on Sunday. We hadn't yet had the Sabbath revolution, where we decide what it means. Europe also had a Sabbath revolution as well, where things were closing on Sunday, but that came from this tie here. That was that debate. And what day is it? Is it Saturday? Is it Sunday? I mean, it was Saturday when Christ was on the earth. Sunday was the day he was risen. So some people celebrate Sabbath on Sunday because that's actually the Lord's day, the day he rose from the dead. And other Christian traditions celebrated on Saturday because that's what it always was when Christ was on the earth. And it's just a debate. So we're talking about it. Everybody wants to know which one is it. Sex. I don't think that one ever gets old. But they want to know, is sex just a part of the marriage contract? Should you get to choose whom and when and how? Is it only for procreation purposes? Or is it also for fun? Lots of conversations about the purpose of sex. Modesty. How to dress, what to wear. What counts as modest, what doesn't count as modest. Food. Which foods are good foods to eat, not good foods to eat. You know, we've got the Islam and Jewish traditions, both have beliefs that follow very closely. Theirs are almost exactly the same food restrictions, not exactly, but close. So what about food restrictions? There's food restrictions in the Bible. Should those be a thing again? And then we have authority, which I have over there, I'm going to get to. Who's got the authority to do what, when, how, why? How do we know what they are? So these are our trending topics in the United States in the Second Great Awakening. In fact, in New York, just up the Susquehanna River, it was so popular. It's called the burned over district because all of the fields looked like dead grass because there were so many religious revivals by so many different religious organizations that everybody was traveling up there and everybody was going. I mean, it was Woodstock of the 1800s. Like everybody was there who was anyone, and they were all fighting about these things. Everyone was trying to figure it out. Out of this, we have 3 or 4 very important religious traditions in the United States that are very American in that sense. I'm going to start with 2 of them. It starts with a story of teenagers, similar to some of our other ones, that are looking for truth, God. So they pray. They pray. They are visited by God in a vision. These are individual stories. And feel that none of the religions are true. None of these ones that we have talked about are really the religion that God would have them. And so they need to restore. These are called restoration churches. They feel that they need to get back to what Jesus was originally teaching, that we got lost in here somewhere, and they need to restore the truth after having their first vision. Does anybody know the name of one of these teenage prophets? The one you've probably heard of the most is Joseph Smith. The Mormons. Do they call themselves Mormons? What's the name of the Mormon church? Because it's not the Mormon church, I care that much.
Church of Latter-day Saints.
Really close. Really, really close. It's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Yep, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And their preferred nickname is members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Yeah, I know. They feel the same way. But the reason why it's important is because they believe in Jesus Christ. And they feel like people forget that. So it's important to them that they're called members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in case you're working with them. You call them Mormon, most will not be officially offended. Many will tell you that it doesn't matter. But I can tell you that it probably does, even if they are unaware. Because they would never call themselves Mormon to each other or to themselves, but they might to you because they don't think you'll understand who they are.
What's the time period of that?
This here, it's right in here. So we're between 1800 and 1900. So most of this stuff, the restoration churches are coming out in the 1820s to 1840s. I just couldn't, I didn't want to keep going down, but thank you, because it technically would keep coming down here. So 1820s to 1840s is when the restoration churches are coming. So, so when you're working with them, we ask people how do they prefer to be called. Mormon is a nickname from the Book of Mormon, which they have in addition to the Bible and the New Testament, Old Testament. They have all the same other things. They just also have the Book of Mormon. which Joseph Smith found and translated. And they believe it's a book of scripture in addition to the other books of scripture. All right, the other one that you may not have heard of, almost the exact same story, within about 15 years of each other, also a first vision, also receiving a revelation that none of the churches are true. Her name was Ellen White. Anybody heard of Ellen White? It's not sad. We've heard of Joseph Smith, but not Ellen White. And they're equal, like they have the same story. Why did we keep the male story, not the female story in our history books? I don't know. Don't ask me, right? I clearly don't have an opinion. It is Ellen White and the what's the religion? Seventh Day, random name? Seventh-day Adventists. Seventh-day Adventists. So Seventh-day Adventists comes the idea that in their Sabbath debate, they hold it on Saturday instead of Sunday. So that's one of their big, but they have, any of these restoration churches are going to have opinions on all of these things. Because that's really what drove this change. So if you have a restoration church, you can ask any member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they will tell you this is all very important to them. Same with Seventh-day Adventists. The next one, who's the other one that comes to our doors? That's not the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's not the Mormons. Jehovah's Witnesses. Now theirs is a little bit different in the way that theirs came about. In the Jehovah's Witness story, they're actually a Bible study group that's studying the Bible and discovering, talking about all these same things and discovering that everybody went wrong. But it's still a restoration church in its design to hope to restore to the true church. Okay. One that's not considered a restoration church at the same level, but is also very American, that I'll put a bigger space, is evangelical. It comes down further south. If we could do these in order, it goes Mormon, Seventh-day, Jehovah's Witness, they'd be like step, like right through here. They all do step, but evangelical comes last. And it comes from the Southern, and it comes from a combination of learning from the slaves and some of the slave religious beliefs merging in, some of those African beliefs merging in to Christianity. That's often why you get a lot of the born again, comes out a lot of here, a lot of dependence on the Spirit, the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit is very important in that tradition. Comes from a lot of the spirituality from the African traditions. So those are kind of our very American things. So then, moving on, we're going to talk about authority, because this is where we're going to come in to bring them all up. So we're going to start about Christian authority. So we have the Catholics. Who is the head of the Catholic Church? You did that one, right? All right. And then we'll do Mormon, even though I should write Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Who is the head of their church? They have a prophet. They use very combined Old and New Testament. So prophet, surprisingly enough, lives out in Utah. But they have a prophet that has essentially the same role as a pope, and that is the line of authority. Joseph Smith was the first prophet in the modern era. But just like the Catholics and everybody else, the Mormons do believe that this is the same history. They don't believe they're a different history. Does that make sense? So they believe that God intended for there to be a head, and that the head should be a prophet. All right, the next one we're going to do is, I should have done it up here, but Orthodox. The Orthodox Christian Church in Eastern and Central Europe is, they have patriarchs or archbishops, depending on how that translates. So they have regional leaders rather than a specific leader overall. Who's the head of the Jehovah's Witnesses? I know. It's actually called the anointed class. They believe that there's 144,000 in the anointed class based on scriptures in the New Testament of the 144,000. Very interesting the way that it works out for them, because there's more than 144,000 and only God and you can know if you're one. Like, it's very complicated for those of us not in the faith to quite understand how which I think I spelled that wrong too, the anointed class works. But theirs is officially a grouping rather than a person that's there. Then we have the Protestants. So Protestant faith, what makes them a Protestant faith is this. What is the authority for the Protestant churches? That would be anyone who probably calls themselves Christian. What? Bishop. Not bishop, no. What's the authority? Where's the authority at? Close. It's not a person, actually.
Oh.
It's the Bible. The Word is God, and God is the Word. If you're working with somebody who's raised in a Protestant tradition, then they will say, where does it say that in the Bible? That is the authority. The Bible gives authority. It's the Word of God. It cannot be changed. New versions come out potentially. And the same with the Seventh-day Adventists and evangelicals. They actually also use the Bible. So this is where we come in, where some often ask me, are they all really all Christian? There are some people who do not want Orthodox Catholics. Where's my other ones? Mormon, Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't want them to be considered Christian. Have you ever heard that they're not Christian? That actually just means they're not Protestant. But they don't like that term because it means they were protesting against. About 20 years ago, the Protestant traditions across the United States tried to change language so that Christian just meant Protestant. So that if you were a Catholic, Mormon, Orthodox, Jehovah's Witness, then you weren't a Christian. And you'll still see that out there today, that many people think that this just means Christian, because that's how they've defined it. Because those who have the Bible as their authority is what they're calling a Christian. It's not about whether or not you believe in Jesus Christ. All of these groups believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, Savior of the world, born in Bethlehem, died in Gethsemane. Some of them have differing views. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is pre the Council of Nicaea, right? See where they grouped off? The Book of Mormon. So do they have the Trinity? No, they don't have the Trinity. They're still pre-Trinity time period, but they still believe that Jesus Christ is God. So that's where that comes from. That's one of the questions a lot of people have.
So the Mormons, do they introduce polygamy or
Okay, polygamy comes from back here. Israel and his 12 sons. Joseph was, Israel has 2 wives plus servants and others. So the reason how he gets 12, polygamy is very active. Any Christian of any way, shape, or form has to believe in polygamy being ordained of God at some point, or the Bible isn't true. The Quran isn't true, and the Torah isn't true. The question about whether or not when it should stop is a cultural thing, and it is correct that for a very short time period, from about 1840 to 1890, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints practiced polygamy in the United States, and it was legal at the time when they practiced it.
Do Mormons recognize the fundamental church as Mormonism, or?
So that's a very good question. So what happens with there? So I'll go back. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not recognize the fundamentalists as part of their faith. Academically, I'm a researcher of religion. We often use the word Mormon. So not in this definition here, but to mean everybody who uses the Book of Mormon. There's about 300 faiths that use the Book of Mormon. The fundamentalists being one of the smallest. The two largest being the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Community of Christ, headquartered in Missouri. Those are the two largest. So there are multiple religions that use the Book of Mormon. And as an academic, we sometimes cover them all under Mormon because they use the Book of Mormon. But that's where it gets confusing because then, that's more of a heading than specific. But only really academics do that. I don't even think members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints technically know that they would be in this larger group called Mormon academically. But no, they would not recognize any of them as a member of their faith. And nor would they. The fundamentalists don't consider them to be the same faith. They would say that the larger Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a totally lost and fallen tradition. And that they have the true faith going all the way back to Adam and Eve. Because everybody claims they've got the true one going all the way back. All right, so the prophet, and so they may have their own leader that wouldn't be the same prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Although I know there are many more questions that we may have for the beliefs of the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I do have to end this video. So I'll end it with a takeaway from the class. That like the Chinese New Year and the Passover, we may not be as different as we think. And because of that, it's easy to be kind to other people, despite our differences. And don't get me wrong, our differences are what make us who we are. But remember, you're the only person who ever can be you.